Welcome on my first step ever podcast. It is such an exciting times because we are now nearing our 200th episode. It just means that there are so many interesting people out there who had the courage to build a life of their dreams, or they're still in the process of evolving that. But what sets them apart is the conviction that they have in them and the actions that they have taken to create that life. And it is always the butterflies before the very first step that we take in any area of our life that gives us that fear, that doubt, and makes us think, am I worthy enough to make that move? And the answer is very clear there that it is a yes, only and only if you are true to your journey. So please join me in welcoming one such amazing woman. Please join me in welcoming Liz van Zyl. Liz, welcome on my first step ever.
Ishani, thank you so much for inviting me on.
I am very, very excited. Before we get into this particular amazing conversation, and as I said, that we would love, my listeners, people who are watching us, to get to know you as a person and how you kind of, built into the strong mind, the personality that you are today. Because I think the character behind who we know you is something that is, making everything fall in place for yourself, because that is what you carry forward and people love you for that. So let me give a sneak peek of what you do today and what really motivates you professionally. And then we are going to step into the little Liz's world. So, on this episode, the 199th episode of my first step ever, I'm joined by someone who operates right at the intersection of founders, funding, and the ecosystems that help startups truly scale. And Liz is the head of partnerships at Tractor Ventures. Do check them out, where she's helping expand access to revenue aligned, non-dilutive capital across Australia and New Zealand. So, people, if you're not aware of or what all these words mean, you can Google them and understand what it really means. Today, Tractor Ventures has supported 260 plus companies with over 125 million in funding. Wow, now this is a really, really huge feat. There's so many startups out there looking for the right source of funding, and I think the number shows that you have really kind of bridged that gap and helped a lot of startups, just give them the boost when and where it is really needed, and changing how founders really grow without giving away equity too early. So beyond that, as I said, Liz is a true connector and ecosystem builder. She's the co-creator of FOMO Killer Society. Wow, this I'm going to really kind of touch upon very soon in a conversation. A partner at Aussie Founders Club, helps build studio space and serves on the board and investment committee at Mayfly Ventures. She also advises investors and local government, bridging grassroots communities with industry and policy. So, my friends, as you hear this, you already know that she is a multi talented woman with multidisciplinary interests and kind of ventures that she's carrying out. And this only stems from a very strong purpose and a very strong why. And that is created when you have a very strong foundation in your head, heart, and mind. So let's just begin, Liz. I would love to first go back to the very, very interesting time, the fortunate time when you were born in the family that you were. Please take us through your early childhood days and the mindset of the people that you were growing with.
Ishani, thank you for that kind introduction. And you said the fortunate time when I was born. I really reflecting on this conversation in preparation. I just again realized how fortunate I was to be born into the family that I was born into. So, for a little bit of context, I am South African. And English is my second language, so that's why you'll pick up the accent. And I was born into an Afrikaans South African family, and my mum and dad are, perhaps the most incredible people I've ever met, uh, and as is kind of my extended family. What they gave me is directly it has directly informed who I've become. And that's really been, things like unconditional love, the values that they instilled in myself and my younger brother, curiosity, a focus on other people. So in a time in South Africa that was quite turbulent, my parents, lived and breathed values that I think really set me up for success for the rest of my life.
That's very interesting, Liz, that you take us through your amazing family and the little setup that you had while growing up, and the way you speak of them is just such a beautiful bond to kind of understand that they are your first heroes. In your specific case, Liz, as you mentioned that that you were kind of impacted by the values that you saw running in your extended family and your immediate family while you were growing up. Let's say you were kind of in your first decade of your life, in the early days, what was one thing that you remember from that time that makes you happy?
So I have two very different examples that come to mind. The first is, like, I remember being 5 years old, being at that point the only child, and having a baby brother being born. I remember the phone call with my mum, like, the old handset phone call with a string to it, like talking to mom on the phone. And she was in hospital. She had just given birth to my brother. And I remember asking her, is it a little girl? Is it a sister? Because I really wanted a sister. And her saying, no, it's a brother. And like, that is one of my first memories, and obviously one that massively shaped my life. Today, I'm very happy that it's a brother. He's incredible. But I remember just the sheer, excitement and joy and curiosity around what is this thing, a brother? What does one do with a brother? And being able to chat to mom on the phone, etc. She actually sent me a teddy bear from the hospital, a really big teddy bear, and I still have it 31 years later. So so that's just a special memory that brings me joy when I was like around about 5 years old. And then another one that I remember was at the age of 11, I had volunteered to do a 1.2 kilometer run for my school. And I was not at that point a very sporty child at all. I only became more sporty and active when I was much older. I basically had two left feet for a long time as a child, or at least felt that I did. And I remember, like, I couldn't get into any of the other athletics competitions. So because you actually had to do the heats and then compete your way in. I didn't do that. I couldn't do that. Basically, I couldn't compete my way in. So I volunteered for the one race in the school that no one wanted to compete for. That was the only way I could get into athletics. But I was not fit for a 1.2 kilometer run at all. And I remember going home and my mom being like, do you understand what you've actually just signed up for? Shall we start practicing so that you can actually prepare for what you're about to try and do? And so she connected me with someone she knew who was an athlete, and we practiced together. And then on the day of the actual race, because I had no idea what I was doing and I was 11 years old, I started the race really fast. So I sprinted like the first 300 meters and then totally lost my breath and started really stressing about how am I going to complete this race, right? And I remember, so there were only 4 of us competing in this race. One person had already given up, which meant there were 3 of us left. The other 2 were well-trained athletes. And then there was me, right, trying to just finish this race. And I remember my mum running down from the stadium and getting into the middle of the athletics track and running with me and clapping with me on the inside, being like, wow, just you can do this, just keep going. And I ended up finishing the race and coming 3rd, right? I was probably 3 minutes later than the rest of the other 2 competitors. But it was just, looking back, it's both incredibly embarrassing that my mum had to like come and clap for me just so I could finish the race. But I also think, it speaks volumes about what I said earlier around the values that taught me about showing up, about finishing, about just keeping going, and about the value of having other people who support you and cheer you on.
What really caught my attention over here is that, yes, of course, when you said that, the values that you grew up with, seeing in your parents, this is something that they have exhibited. When you lead by example, that stays with a child as you grow up even more. But you said that you weren't good at that, and you felt that no, you won't be able to, make it to any of the other races. But you still had that thought that I want to run, and then you picked the one which you felt that you could make into. Very, very good, I think, thinking. What I want to ask over here, Liz, is that, and this is very interesting, I really am curious to understand that where did the thought come from that I will run, even after knowing that every odd is against you in your head? So, yeah, if you can take us through that.
So I think the first thing I have to put a disclaimer on is that I absolutely did not know how tricky it would be, and how much endurance it would actually take. And I think this is kind of a philosophy that I've used my whole life, is why not? Like, I guess I don't think about it all that much. I just it's more a thought of like, oh, I really want to do this. I'm going to try and do this. My dad has always taught me something that I hold very dear. He's always said, let's think about the worst possible thing that can happen in any situation, right? And then let's plan for it. So let's figure out, if you trip and fall, what are you going to do? If you get tired halfway through, what are you going to do? Like, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen? Let's identify that. Let's plan for it so that it's okay. I've got a plan in case, I fall flat on my face. But then also, now that you've got the plan and you know what the worst thing is and you can deal with it, let's focus on actually where you're going or where you're hoping to go, rather than the worst possible thing that can happen. And so I think that kind of philosophy has served me in that, look, it makes me look for the worst case scenario the whole time, right? Which might seem quite pessimistic to be like, oh, I want to try this thing. Okay, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? But actually what it just helps me do personally is identify, okay, worst thing that can happen is I'm going to fall on my face. I'm not going to die. I'm not, like, people might laugh at me. What's the worst, that comes of that? Not that much. So you know what? This is something I really want to do. I'm going to try. And then, and so I think that I don't think I thought about how challenging it may be. I think I just kind of thought, okay, worst case scenario, I fall flat on my face or I don't complete the race. It's still better than not having tried in the first place.
Life is about the kind of challenges that we have, the situations that we face, and so is entrepreneurship, business, or even if you are working, for any organization. This is what it's about, figuring it out and still going ahead, doing what you really have that itch in your head and mind, what if I try, kind of a thing, and not thinking much of what is going to happen. Because to be really honest, if I think we know, the amount of challenges, of the intensity that we are going to face, I think we would never even begin. So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's a very big life lesson, I think, that you are kind of, sharing with us, to our listeners today, people who are watching us, through your story when you were a little Liz at 11 years old. Wow, I think this is such an impactful story. Moving on from there, like, I think, how did that win, did that impact you in any way, or like life was like the same for you after that?
So I guess I didn't see it as a win at the time. Not as much, I suppose, as if I'd actually come second, or if, I didn't have the embarrassment of needing my mum to cheer me on. But I think so whilst I didn't see it as a win, back then, what I did see, and what I've seen a lot in my life, is that when I do hard things and complete them, right, I walk out with a new level of self confidence and a new self narrative almost. And often I don't know how hard the thing is I'm trying to do until I'm in it, right? Because, like you said, if you knew how hard the thing was going to be, you probably might not do it in the first place.
Never.
And I have so many examples of that. I like fast forward, I have climbed volcanoes. I have not eaten for 10 days. I've walked on fire. I moved to Australia, right, where I have no family. And there's so I can give you hundreds of examples of that. And I remember more recently talking to my brother, and we were talking about a new idea that I had that I wanted to pursue. And he said to me, just remember, like, you're the girl who climbed the volcano. You can do hard things. And I think of anything, the lesson of the little 11-year-old Liz running and crying and mom cheering her on didn't feel like a win at the time necessarily, but it did give me a point of reference that I could hold on to try and do the next hard thing. Because it's like, oh, I can, if I could finish a race I never trained for, being a very unsporty child, then I could also stand in front of a crowd and, give a speech. Or I could, a really good example is I could learn English and speak English almost as good as a first language English speaker, for example. So, yeah, like I said, I don't think I thought of it as a win at the time, but definitely every single thing I have thrown myself into has given me a little bit more self confidence and the tools to know that, like, oh, okay, if I like, yes, it's painful. Yes, I'm uncomfortable. Yes, I don't know what I'm doing necessarily, but I can do this. Like, I can push through.
I think what your mom did that day is actually gave you a lifelong visual of
Yeah.
a supporter who's always going to be there whenever you feel like maybe you can't take another one, even one more step. And I think that visual, that feeling that you might have had, the experience that you had, I think that stays on with you in every challenge that you're taking on in your life today. And that's so beautiful. I would really kind of, would like my listeners, young listeners out there, and the young listeners at heart out there, that if there's any time that you feel that life is getting tough and you don't know how much more one needs to do, definitely kind of tap into your resources, the experiences that any person in your life have ever had, shown you that support and told you that you can and you will do it. And if there has never been anyone, I'm sure when you look back, there's always one person that has helped you, which is you yourself. So always rely on yourself, because if you have lived so far, it's because you have done it and you have come this far. Liz, on that note, although there were people around you building that mindset for you, but it was you who was doing everything every step of the way. You were not giving up. Moving a bit forward in your life, in your teenage, or you're going to the school, talk to us about that. What was that for you? Where did you go for your school? What was inspiring you?
Absolutely. So I grew up in quite a rural town at the foot of the mountains in South Africa, and in 300 kilometers from the ocean, 300 kilometers from Johannesburg, farmland, riding horses, walking barefoot on gravel roads, like riding our bikes everywhere. South Africa went through a really turbulent time, continues to do so, really. So I suppose there was a lot of inequality and poverty, and there doesn't always work so well. So, electricity, we didn't always have electricity. We didn't always have running water. A lot of my friends of different races had, different challenges. For example, we would see people begging on the street. We would know of families who are, without jobs or maybe struggling to find food, etc. So I grew up in this world that was both wonderful and wholesome and lovely and supportive. what am I supposed to do in the situation of the socio-political environment in which I grew up. And then at the same time, I think maybe because I was quite an active thinker, I realized very quickly that the people around me, in terms of the school and the town, they thought very differently to me, or at least I felt like I asked more difficult questions and I was more introspective.
Curious, yeah.
Exactly. And so for the bulk of my kind of school life, I didn't really feel like I belonged at all, because I would be the one who would ask questions that other kids didn't really seem to be bothered with much.
Yeah.
I would be a lot more kind of focused on understanding the meaning of life and my kind of duty and role in it. And I think, that environment where you see your friends not having lunch at school, for example, or where you see your mum working extra hard so that she can, make, like, offer food to people or drive them to places or, whatever. That really set me up to think about what can I do, and what is my role, and, how people look after each other. So I suppose, like, that was kind of the environment in which I grew up. And then maybe around the age of 16, I took it a little further. I kind of accepted that, the way I think and the questions I ask are a little bit different probably to most of the kids around me. Their ambitions seemed more kind of local. You grow up in a small town, you stay in the small town, you have a wonderful family, you become a farmer, and or a teacher or whatever, and you build a life locally. My mind didn't quite work like that. And so at the age of 16, I decided that I don't want to be educated in my home language any longer. So I changed my first language my first language of schooling from Afrikaans, which is the language that my family speak, to English, so that I could actually connect more with people from different cultures and also with the rest of the world. And I could start, understanding what the words are and how I can use them for kind of a more expansive impact and a larger network.
The first thing I felt that, sometimes we do feel that we are doing something which other people are not. Asking questions, thinking in a certain way, we just feel that, is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
Because the majority doesn't behave that way, the majority doesn't feel that way, and it is very important to accept ourselves the way that we are, because that's where the magic lies and that's where the essence is, because that's only when you're true to your own self, your personality, your thoughts, your feelings to begin with, that we are able to live a fully valuable life for our own selves. So I think that was quite interesting that you were able to figure that out for yourself, and when the time came for you, you did take a decision, which is also very amazing, because while we are growing up, not everyone has the conviction to make decisions, because as we say, once you make a decision, you don't know what's next to come for it. But I think, as we know from your childhood, you always had that mindset that, what's the worst case scenario, or let's see what will happen. So I think that's probably something that has really helped you, have a firm belief in yourself and just make some decisions. But what I would really like to kind of, ask you, and it's very interesting to understand your journey over here, given that you were kind of, going through all these emotions around that time and you took that decision, you think, when you reflect now, that it was your self belief, or it was just a feeling of wanting to kind of do something more or find a space that you felt you may kind of align in? What was that really made you take the step?
That is such an interesting question. I don't know if it was self-belief. I definitely think there is in that specific example, like there is a sense of conviction that came across me, not necessarily a sense that I can do this, but more a sense that this is what I'm supposed to do, or this is a good thing to do. This makes sense. And maybe I had analyzed it and thought, oh, what's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is I just go back to my old language or whatever it is. Worst case scenario, I still win because I have a little bit of a clearer understanding of English, for example. So I don't know if it was self confidence per se. I think it's more just I get to places and times in my life where I feel almost compelled, right? Where it's not necessarily like, it's like I can't not do this thing. If I don't do this thing, or try, right, or lean into a direction or ask a question or explore, I'm going to regret it. Like I'm going to wonder. I need to not wonder. Like how, like I'm curious and something is wonderful, right? Or filled with wonder, but like I don't, if I don't ask this question right now, the worst case is I'm going to walk around for the rest of my life wondering, what if I had, what if I had started learning the English language? What if I had asked that person that question? Or what if I had applied for that job? Or, I don't want to know what if. I'd rather be like, okay, I tried this thing, nothing happened. Or, okay, I tried this thing, really bad idea. Right. And I'm sure I have one. I can't think of a great one right now, but I promise you I've had many of those too, right? And so I don't think it was necessarily self-confidence. I think it was a combination of being compelled and like that conviction of, okay, well, I'm just gonna do this and see what happens, basically.
Excellent. And I think, although, people, when people will listen to this, the first thought that will come to any of their mind is that, yeah, it's obvious, yeah, why would you need to have regrets? Like, let's go and take that plunge. But to be honest, and everyone knows that we do fear taking that plunge. So although it's very obvious, the action is something that most of us kind of freeze at the point of making that action. But that is so interesting. That is one thing that sets you up for your next phase of your life. For each individual, if you take that action, turning that what ifs and not having regrets, and keep moving on. So it's really interesting. I think we are kind of dealing with the 16-year-old Liz over here. She's now about to take that plunge to listen to the calling that she has. And so far, what I've understood, Liz, about you is that you believe that your actions would provide you the confidence. You believe that I don't want to have any regrets. You want to just do it, figure things out, not think too much. And one thing I realize is that growing up in a space, in the family, with people, with individuals who I think went an extra mile to help others, the service oriented thought process that comes in you now, in your own professional and personal life. I feel that somewhere is translating from that particular experience that you had, obviously, from the very beginning. So, the amazing 16-year-old Liz, please take us through your next phase of your life.
Absolutely. Before I do that, I just quickly want to connect back to what you just mentioned about kind of service and others, and growing up in a place where it is challenging and where people rely on each other. In South Africa and in broader Africa, we have this concept called Ubuntu. Ubuntu basically translates into something along the lines of, I am because you are, or I exist because of you. And so I think that sentiment is something that is shared across so many different religions, not necessarily 100% in the same way. So I think for me, it means it takes a village to raise a child. It takes, it takes a doctor to heal a person. It takes a farmer to feed a person. And so then collectively, like I literally I couldn't exist basically without other people, right? And I most certainly couldn't be who I am without the little contributions and support, and even, even the negative things people said and did along the way shaped every single one of us. And so there's like this kind of golden thread of service and the other, and bringing everyone together and supporting each other is something that South Africa is really known for. Firstly, especially in the difficult times, of which there is a lot, right? And then also, I think that really informed a lot of my thinking and personality over the years. So 16-year-old Liz was the first person in her family to decide to be educated in English, and to the best of my knowledge still is the only person in my family to be educated in English as a first language. 16-year-old Liz was really interested in really big questions like, who created God? Is a really good example of a question I remember talking to my mum about on a road trip one day. It's like, yeah, sure, okay, so I get that, God is a thing, but like, who created him in the first place? Like that, those kinds of questions. So definitely, deep thinker, really interesting, humanities and philosophy, and I really loved cars. My dad and his brother are both engineers, like qualified engineers. They went on to work in oil and gas, and I think they kind of instilled in me a real big interest for cars. Flash forward to like 18-year-old me, I had done things like I'd written to a motoring magazine in South Africa, and I said to them, look, I'm 18 years old, I'm thinking about my career, I'm really interested in writing about cars, please may I come do an internship with the magazine? And they let me, and I ended up being a hobbyist motoring journalist for like 4 years after. I was published first when I was 18. I went on car launches. I met Jeremy Clarkson and the guys from Top Gear. I drove all kinds of sports cars just off the back of, that initial kind of outreach. So I think, I was like, other things I was really interested in and shaped by through the course of my life was entrepreneurship. My granddad on my mum's side was a really successful entrepreneur, and in the tire business, like car tires.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose there's a link to cars even as early as that.
Everywhere.
Right? And also my uncle on my mum's side was a lawyer. And so I suppose just like he had his own practice. I suppose through all of those forces, I was always interested in a less linear path. So not necessarily becoming, an accountant or a teacher or a public servant or whatever, where there's a really clear career path. I was kind of more interested in doing random things and just kind of try like pushing a button and seeing what happens. And more, and whilst those things were random, they were always eventually came back to people and the world and service and those kinds of themes.
Well, firstly, I like to say that it's so interesting to know that you have met the who's who of Top Gun and you have driven sports cars. This is such an interesting, I think, trivia about you.
I've done so many random things like that, and I think it's always been a process almost of following the breadcrumbs. So off the back, most people don't know this about me, but off the back of becoming a motoring journalist, I then started being a content creator and a writer specifically. This is like after studying, etc. And then I accidentally kind of fell my way into co-owning an equestrian magazine because one of my clients offered me the opportunity to acquire the magazine with them. And there's so many little examples of that where, when you, I think, and maybe this is a really important piece of the puzzle for me in my life, but also for people in general, is like when I took the first step, the next step appeared. I definitely, at the age of 16, 17, 18, and through to this day. I don't have a very specific vision of what I want my life to look like or like what exact role I want to hold. I have more an idea around the territory. So rather than having an exact map of what step, okay, this step and then this step, like, if you're a chartered accountant, you study accountancy, then you go and become an intern at a big four, then you get promoted. I never had that kind of view of it. I kind of more had like, okay, this is the territory in which I want to play. I'm interested in these things. This is my values. I know what I want to feel like, and I know what I want the world to feel like in the thing that I'm doing, but I don't necessarily know exactly how to get there, which might mean, sometimes you take some interesting turns. Maybe it takes me a little bit longer because I don't know exactly what that thing needs to look like, but like it's very much a process of the process rather than a fixation on one specific achievement, if that makes sense.
Oh, that does to me for sure. And I like to say that thank you for sort of either, what is it, confessing that, admitting that, or saying that out loud. Because I know for a lot of people who are watching us right now or listening to us right now, they did sigh a relief in their head right now. Because there are certain, I would say, fortunate people who have the clarity. It's very important to have a clarity. But there are many people out there who know the periphery of the things. They have the vision of the territory, as you mentioned. They know that what makes them feel alive. They know what kind of environment, people, or sort of skills that they have, which they may have plenty of them. But there's no specific path, clear path. But by just saying what you just said today, Liz, it just makes so much more sense that pick up the crumbs, the breadcrumbs, like you're the magnet for it, the one that kind of suits you best, that you have the best compatibility with, and the next step appears. This is so beautiful, and it is such a valuable, I think, practical learning for everyone. That if you're stuck somewhere, you don't really need to beat yourself for not knowing what you want in life, because it's not possible that if you've lived your life for a couple of years and you have absolutely no idea. I don't think so. That's possible. You may know a few things, and that's enough to take you ahead. So focus on what you know about yourself. And something very that's a key. I think a golden suggestion or a tip, something that you mentioned over there, Liz, was you knew how you want to feel, and that is so important. Once you know how you want to feel in any space, in any place, with the kind of people, it is always your guiding that North Star. So, given that, what you have shared right now, Liz, oh my God, I had so many questions in my head because it's so interesting. Your journey is non-linear. And at I know maybe 20s, that's what we all do. We are supposed to go and explore the world out there, which you were doing, non-conventional route. You were just doing what you felt right. You just went head on, wrote that email, got that internship, probably because they saw that passion in you, and then you proved it with the confidence that you had in your writing. And yes, you did do that, and it took you from one step to other. What I want to ask over here is, although we do explore life, profession, ourselves in our 20s, but then there's also a thing of how can I secure myself financially around that time? How were you dealing with that thing? What was the smart things that you were doing with this unconventional choices that you made? Or what was the mindset for you around financial security around that time with the different unconventional choices that you were making?
So that is a really good question. My interests were always ones that seemed less lucrative, right? And I'll give you a really great example of like how this unfolded for me. After after when I was 16 and changing to English as a first language in school, by the age of 18, I I had the opportunity to go to university, and I needed to figure out what I want to do, right? that old painful chestnut of needing to figure out who am I going to be and what do I want to do. And so by then, because I had to study English very academically to learn a lot of it, I ended up really loving it. So I would read books, and I literally, this is way before smartphones and all those things. I had
Mhm.
an actual physical book, and every time I read a word that I didn't understand, I would write it in my book, and I would Google the meaning, right? And I'd write, so I had like almost a book of definitions, for example.
Mhm.
And so that kind of, it taught me things like the word for a lover of books is called bibliophile, for example. That's the
Ah.
word, right? And um, gosh, it all comes back to me now. Yeah, I knew I wanted a good lexicon, which is, the word for another word, a similar word for vocabulary. Anyway, and so as you can see, that kind of stuff really excited me, and it was such an interesting journey to learn about the origin of words, etc. So I then was like, okay, hold on. I know I can write because I've been writing for, as a hobby a journalist. I know I have a real interest in languages and humanities and how we understand the world through languages. So I'm going to go study English, which is funny, right? Because in most places in the world, studying English is probably not going to yield.
Yeah.
It's not
Then.
gonna. You might not become a millionaire, right? Or some people do
Yep.
if you're an incredible author or whatever, right? But I at that point I hadn't identified those as real options. I thought, okay, let me go study communications and English and see if I can, further myself maybe in corporate comms or something like that, or as a writer because I really did love it. And so in my first year in university, we had philosophy as a compulsory unit that I needed to take, having never had any exposure to philosophy before. And I just fell in love. It
Oh.
almost feels for me like everything in life is grounded in philosophy, including languages, and the two work so well together. So I then, in my second year, changed from, well, I had English as a major as well as communications, and then added a third major. So, in other words, I was pursuing 1.5 degrees basically at the same time so that I could do all of the subjects that I found really interesting and 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 still complete my studies as quickly as possible, basically. And so I guess a part of the financial stability of it all was, firstly, I was really fortunate that my dad really looked after me during my studies and I stayed I from home, and he was and is an incredible provider. So between him and mom, like I was incredibly blessed that I could do that. And at the same time, I tried everything in my power to make my own money wherever I could. So I did things like I worked during holidays at my uncle's law firm as a receptionist, answered the phones, welcomed the people, made coffee, those kinds of things. I continued writing. So I wrote as a journalist for my entire university degree. And by the end of it, I then, fell in love with this idea of becoming a philosophy professor and spending my life being an internal student and all those wonderful things. And I can promise you, even though I didn't formally pursue being a philosophy lecturer, I still very much am an eternal student because life is the eternal teacher. But through that whole process, I realized that I can sell my services. I can sell writing
Wow.
and thinking, basically. And this is, back in the day before Gen AI was a thing. I would write for people to help them with their websites, like the actual words of their websites, or I would through little projects of blogging and articles about cars and whatever. I would meet other people who also need articles or need content. And so through doing that, I kind of built up a base of people who would reach out to me if they needed copywriting work done. And that helped me start bringing in income. And by the time that I finished my second degree, which was also in philosophy, I had
You really love it.
amassed, true story, I would totally marry Plato if I could, or Socrates. But anyway, by the end of my degrees, I had so much demand for writing that I realized that I can actually make more money writing than I can as a lecturer. And so I was like, okay, let me, and literally that means that I was making more money from my kind of hobby project. So let me focus on that rather than on a career as a professor. I can always go back and finish, study some more, do my doctorate, for example, and I can go. I think, or at the time, I thought it was way easier to go from academia to industry and then back to academia than from academia. Well, from just stay in academia. And so, I thought,
Absolutely.
okay, let me lean into where there is demand and kind of see how much of it I can build out. And I basically started my own little business from there.
I absolutely love this, Liz, because this is quite a classic case of how a business comes into being is when you know that you have a skill that you have been very, very ardently, passionately, intently working on, because that something comes naturally to you and you're making efforts to get better at it. You're not just resting on your laurels, or you're not just taking the skill for granted because that comes, it's something that you are interested in or you can do it. You really invested your time in that, and you were still exploring ways to what you can do in your career. And I love the fact that because you were true to your skills, you gave your all when you did that work for your clients as a freelancing work that you were doing, that you were able to build a base for your own audience. And when you saw that there's a gap and you already have a list of clients, that's when you kind of went on building. It's like MVP, you say, the proof of concept, that you just
Yeah.
went ahead, and that's the basic of any business, to say so. So I think you've already done that in your real life. You were kind of, I think, living a life which people are living now. So you were living your futuristic life back then. What people exactly doing now. One thing I want to add, that in my experience, I feel like I've come across a lot of people who would love to kind of create content, but I think the essence lies in how well you're able to translate your thoughts into your writing and then create content out of your writing. And it is a very, very acquired skill. It needs time, it needs intention, and it needs constant practice. A lot of people can create content, but if that particular base is not strong, somewhere something kind of is a hit and miss when the audience sees it. So it's kind of a superpower, something I am really kind of working on. Yeah, thank you so much, Liz, for kind of so far taking us into your life, how you came about doing things. I really like the fact that that you just went ahead with what you felt that you were good at, you're interested in, just went for it, just kept working on the next steps, and path started becoming clearer. Now that you mentioned that you plunged into creating your own business, however interesting that sounds, that you had a base of clients which you built with your own efforts and the relationships that you had built with them, doing a business is certainly different, and it involves a lot of other things than just selling your skills, building relationships. Did you find any challenges when you started your first business, as you said, or was it like something that actually came naturally to you? And if there are some tips that you can share with our listeners.
So I definitely had a lot of challenges. I think for me personally, when I started the business, it wasn't a day that I woke up and I was like, okay, now I'm going to start a business. It kind of grew gradually, from little contracts on the side, etc., to a place where maybe one day I was like, okay, now I'm going to focus on this full time. But the challenges were things like I had a degree in in English and philosophy. Like I had no training on how to be an entrepreneur, for example,
Mm.
or how to get clients, or how to run finances, or hiring people, or anything like that. And luckily, again, I didn't know. I didn't think about the fact that I would need to hire someone at some point when I just jumped, right? I jumped and
Yeah.
I dealt with what was in front of me. And then when a new project would come that was too big for me to handle by myself, then all of a sudden I'd be like, okay, hold on. Now I have a situation. How do I deal with the situation? For example, I think a couple of challenges were things like beliefs that I held, or even that, that the society, like popular narratives around things like, oh, but you're not a real entrepreneur anyway, or, what do you know about running a business? And especially this was very true for me in the kind of the cultural context in which I grew up, was things like, but you're a woman. You can't be a real
Mm.
business person necessarily.
Ouch.
Look at you. And I don't think anyone ever said it. Nobody ever says it quite like that, right? But they
It's
just
subtle.
take you a little less serious. Or
Mm.
they're like, oh, the cute girl who's trying to do the content for us kind of thing. So I think those were, so learning about finances and how to actually run the finances of the business was something that was a particular challenge for me. And to this day, understanding the finances of a business and how it operates, and what, how to manage cash flow, and how to use different types of funding for different scenarios. I remember at the age of about 23 getting a really big project and not having enough time now to do it all myself, because especially if you're in a services business, you exchange time for money, right?
Yeah.
And services,
Yeah.
basically. So I would bill per hour,
Mm.
but I was already billing 60 hours a week, so where was I going to fit
Oh
in
wow.
another 30? And you learn things along the way, like you you for every hour that you bill, you also spend time bringing in that business, right? You also spend time working on your business, not just in your business. So I had to learn, for example, that for every hour I bill, I'm probably working 1.3 times that amount of time. Right? So then you've got to understand, okay, well, if I'm actually working 1.3 hours per billable hour, what is my actual rate versus my billing rate, for example, right? And also, okay, hold on, if am I misquoting my clients? Am I being too kind of lenient or too optimistic in terms of how much time it's going to take me to deliver on this thing? And then when I got that other big, big project, I realized, oh gosh, I don't have enough time. I need to get someone else in to help me. But that, bringing in another person, firstly, doesn't just double your hours automatically. People need time. People need time to learn. People need time to
Yeah.
ramp up, for example, need to understand the client, the industry, all those things. And then also people, getting another person or a team on board means you've got to spend time with those people. So you're not only losing time by training them, for example, by being in
Mm.
meetings with them, by editing their work. Like sometimes you can just do it faster yourself. But that's, in the short term, there's especially a large investment of time to get people on board. But if they stay with you over time, you then reap that return on investment. But that's important. Will they stay with you over time? Small businesses, at the time that I was running my little business, 1 in 3 people left a small business every year, right? So they would have
Okay.
a churn of staff of about 33%.
Mm.
So that would mean that you'd take all this time, train this person, and then there's a high likelihood that they might leave, right? Not because they don't like
Mm.
you or whatever, but that's just because they're looking for the next thing, or because
Yeah.
corporate roles offer them more money or whatever. So
Mm.
some of the challenges I had were around learning how to use my finances to buy me capacity, how to manage staff, and then also how to kind of overcome the narrative around, oh, but you're young, or you're a woman, or you weren't trained as an entrepreneur, you know, uh, how cute of you to try this.
Wow, Liz, thank you for that deep dive into the very first steps, the feelings that an early stage entrepreneur really gets into. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that they are actually entrepreneurs because, as you said, the narratives don't just let them think that what they're doing is actually what an entrepreneurship journey involves. There is so much to unpack in your journey, and I would love, love, love to talk more about you. So, Liz, as I said, this is so much fun. I am getting to know so much about, I think, the very nature that you built along these years is exactly what someone needs to kind of lead life. I think, as I said earlier, and also the business. And you don't shy away from learning on along the way, and that is what is more important. And you don't even shy away from accepting that maybe we can fall short at certain times, or maybe this is where I need help, or maybe this is where I improve, because we cannot do everything just by our own selves, especially when we are building something that's going to cater to a large population. You need the different expertise, you need the different strengths. And I think it can only amplify when you obviously have people who have different expertise than you have, but with the same mission and, align, then it kind of amplifies because everyone's interest then is the same interest, and people are very happy kind of going forward together. Given that we have now come to the space in your life, you've traveled so far from the early childhood to you now, having your own, kind of building your own very first business, finding things out. You've really given us a very good sneak peek. I want to ask the next step from you. Today we know that you are funding the ecosystem, you're bridging the gap between the people and the resources, and now we know why and how and why you are really a good person to do that, because you see the intent in that and you've already had those experiences. Before we come to what you do at present, I think there's something I would love to kind of ask, and I think there might be a lot of things, but just one thing. Has there been anything where, as you said, I think along the journey, that positives being said, negatives being said, what has been the most demotivating situation or something that really let you down in your career that may have impacted you in actually in reshaping, rebuilding, or kind of helping you launch the 2.0 version of yourself? Although I don't think that you need a 2.0 version, you're pretty good enough in your head with the mindset. But has there any been experience that you can share, because they shape us a lot?
So I think I'm at the 20.0 version of Liz, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
I think it's really easy when you look, I suppose, at the kind of public snapshot of my life now, to think that it has just been like kind of overall successful. Absolutely not been the case. Anything might not necessarily personal failures, but situations which failed, or situations which didn't go to plan, or really tough. I'm 100% the product of the tough situations, the lessons in my life, and those have often come from quote unquote negative experiences. There have been many. So, for example, I moved to Australia with a very clear intention to join a business that at the time had said that they wanted to. So they were a startup, and they were exploring raising. And so the first 9 months of my role here in Australia, we pushed really hard to see if we could raise. And then, and 9 months into that, we realized, no, we don't actually want to raise. We want to explore a different route. And so technically you could argue that that was a quote unquote failure, because my goal at the time was to leave my business in South Africa and my family and life, to move to Australia and to work on this specific success narrative of like startup raises millions, right? That was the goal in my mind. Through the process of us changing that plan, I ended up so instead of raising, we looked at kind of private investors instead, kind of more a PE route or being acquired, etc. We were exploring IPO, so listing on the stock exchange. We looked at all of these different things. And through that process, firstly, I gained a lot of experience in a environment in which I had never done before. I learned the differences, what IPO involves, for example, how you prepare for it. I work closely with professionals whom I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so with otherwise, for example. And ultimately, I met the person who later on then offered me a job at the next startup that I went to. And then COVID hit, right? So I go to this new baby startup that's starting out in Australia and has a head office in the UK. COVID hits, they closed down the business. And here I am, like 2 or 3 years into my life in Australia, all by myself, not having an income and not knowing if anyone's ever going to hire anyone else ever again. Worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So funny, right? So you see how that can come back to bite you. Anyway, so I lost my job. It wasn't just me, it was everyone in the team. And all of a sudden I was back to being like, gosh, what do I do? Now, this isn't working out. You could argue that it's a failure, whatever. But from that point of like losing my entire kind of envisioned career path, I had to start again. I had to build again. I had to figure it out again. And I got a single retainer client that wanted content and marketing work, similar to what I did way back in the day in South Africa. And again, at the time, I thought, okay, this is just a quick and easy way for me to make a little bit of money so that I can sustain myself, right? At that time, I was so stressed that I'd moved from my beautiful big apartment into a little studio so that I could minimize my costs and really like try and stretch out the money that I had because I didn't know what the world was going to do in COVID, right? But then I got one client and that client grew bigger. And then because I could say I was working for like this one client, I ended up getting more clients. Next thing you know, I was working, there was a stage. So like from the worst moment in my life in Australia, which is when the business closed and COVID happened, to fast forward a year, I had the biggest and the best financial year of my life to date.
Wow.
Right, that year. Because I went from that moment of crisis to like, okay, let's go. Like, we got to do this. We got to fix this. We got to make this better. So like from that low point, I just worked and worked and worked like crazy. By the end of it, I had 10 like by the end of that year, I had 10 clients, including like the likes of Accenture, for example. I had, more money coming in that I knew what to do with. I was working crazy hours. I was, work weekends, etc. But it also, it was a situation of like, when like make hay while the sun shines or whatever. So just like take it all in and try and maximize it all and so forth. And there are many situations like that. Later on, I grew and like I co-created an accelerator program where we helped businesses in Australia, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, India, etc., where we help them go from founded to funded, growing their businesses and also helping them articulate their narrative to get the necessary funding that they need. Funny that, right? So first entrepreneur, then like starting to help businesses grow to get funding to where I am today, which is someone who is a founding team member of a marketplace startup, someone who has multiple founders communities and almost like 2,000 founders across those communities in Australia, someone who advises entrepreneurs like the Mayfly Ventures team, for example, someone who advises government on how to work with entrepreneurs, and then obviously someone who gets to look after partnerships at a funder themselves, right? So Tractor provides funding to businesses dealing with a lot of these challenges that I just kind of mentioned. So I never in my wildest dreams thought I would get to use or like leverage all of this like disparate experiences to add value to people and to help grow something and make an impact. And yet, kind of, if you keep going, even with the challenges, you start realizing, oh, I can connect these dots, and oh, I should introduce these people. And next moment, you get to do a little bit of everything and leverage the hardship to understand where people are at and to advocate for them and just support them through their growth journey.
This is incredible, Liz. First of all, thank you so much for, really being so honest and taking us through that I think one of the most toughest phases of your professional career. I think that does help us personally, affect us personally as well somewhere. And I think from what I hear, I feel so happy hearing that where you have come personally, because we just went through your journey, and it just makes me, it's just a proof for everyone who's listening to us today, that if you are true to what you have fun doing, you're good at it, but you also put the number of hours of effort, in the beginning of your career, that actually came back saving you when things just felt that I don't know where to go from here. And this also is, and I was thinking when you were saying how things just kind of, it's like the butterfly effect, or the thing how it expanded for you, is because the magic lies in you. And for every individual who is listening to us today, the magic lies in them, because the situations did change in your life, but it was always you, your experiences, your belief in yourself, or that attitude that you have, let's give it a go, let's give it a try, let's do whatever I can in my capacity to do my best. And that attitude really helps in life. It is all about, just believing in the magic that you have and keep working towards it, to keep taking action. Thank you so much, Liz, for being on this podcast. It has been amazing chatting with you, truly. I love that. I love how your story has shaped, and I'm very sure there's more to come. So, all the best for that. I always request my guest speakers to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that they really resonate with.
So mine would be, life happens for you, not to you. So always remember that, even when life happens, quote unquote, to you and you lose your job, it's actually opening a whole new pathway for you if you look. And also, the part about life happening for you presupposes that you have power and agency, as opposed to life happening to you, which sounds like, you are a victim and you are powerless. So if I could leave the listeners with anything, it's to remember that life happens for you, not to you.
Well, coming from a person, in your little brother's words, the girl who climbed the volcanoes and has done much more than that. Thank you so much, Liz, for being on my first step ever. And I will leave links in the show notes for everyone who is interested to get to know more about Liz and, understand where she's going with her endeavors. As I always say, that start believing in yourself and keep believing in yourself. See you until next. Please do give ratings, and please do write your comments. And you can directly reach out to me on my first step ever _IN. That's my Instagram handle. A little about myself. I have always loved performing on stage, acting, speaking, and just emoting myself. So I use these mediums different ways so that I can connect with people, help them, empower them, infotain them, which is to inform them and entertain them. If you would like to collaborate for any opportunities, more than welcome to connect with me on my Instagram handle. Thank you.